Welcome along or welcome back to the Dads in Business podcast, where we aim to have discussions to help busy working dads bring the best of themselves to home and to work. And today we're talking about one of the most important topics, I think, keeps us dads busy, keeps our minds occupied, and it's about the concept of money management. I still am learning my own money principles, money management, money structure, call it what you want. And often there is too much month for the money. Often I worry about larger investments. Often I question where the odd transaction goes. What's happening? What do I plan for? What should I not plan for? All these things are going to be things that we discuss ultimately around the topic of money and happiness and money and planning. And I'm delighted that joining us today is author of the brilliant Behaviour Gap book, which is all about money management. The tagline is simple ways to stop doing dumb things with money. So I'm excited to figure out what that means. And also renowned author and columnist for the New York Times, whose article ran for over a decade. Carl Richards, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. Please do take some time to introduce yourself. Tell us how you got to doing what you do, and where are you joining us from today, Cole?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. It's good to be here. I live currently in Park City, Utah, so in the mountains of the sort of mountain west of the United States. And I mean, listen, I don't know how it's always cute when people tell these narratives about how they got to a certain place in their lives, and the reality is it was just a series of really fortunate accidents. And all I really have to take away from it is like playing in traffic, doing work in public and hoping to get hit. And I'm good at that. I'm apparently not worried quite as much about, or at least paralyzed by the fear of doing public work. So I listen, I got into the money business because in college, at university, I was what's in the States referred to as an undeclared major. It means you didn't know what you wanted to study. So I had no idea what I wanted to study. And during that time in college, I applied for a job that I thought the job was for a security guard. I thought the ad in the newspaper said security. And I thought that was maybe like a mall cop or a bouncer or something. And I was just, I mean, what I thought was this would be great because I could work the graveyard shift and still go to school full time, as one used to do. And I got to the interview, and it turns out the ad said securities, not security. And I didn't know the difference anyway. And somehow it tells you about the applicant pool because somehow I got the job. And then I found myself a couple weeks later answering phone calls about how to invest money. And I had no idea. So my answer was always like, please hold. But it was just sort of that sort of thing. Like, look, I think I'm interested in that. I'm going to go try that thing. And then something would open. So I've been the only skill I think I have is I kind of pretty good at noticing tailwind, when there seems to be momentum towards something, and then kind of going that way. Like when the universe hits me in the back of the head with a big 2x4, 2 or 3 or 4 times, I start to pay attention. So I'm not very good at forward-looking strategy. I'm much better at feeling like, oh, 3 people have asked me to write that down. Maybe I'll write that down. So that's kind of, I could tell 100 stories about that. And I think what's important for your listeners, especially as you're thinking about your career, and I'm in my 50s and I still, like, literally this morning was like, what am I going to do when I grow up? As you're thinking about that, it's more a function of like, oh, following little clues of interest, curiosity, testing, trying things, paying attention if tailwind shows up. It's much more that than thinking, because it's easy to look at people's careers and be like, they had it all figured out. No, they didn't. I mean, they may tell a cute story that leads everybody to believe they had it figured out. They didn't. And I'm just trying to be honest about that.
I love that. And I like how you say, just off a bit of an early tangent, I'm in my 50s and I always wake up thinking, what will I do when I grow up? I think that's a really important thing, because I turn, at the time of recording, I turned 40 this year. So I'm 39. And it wasn't until 35, 34, maybe. I started to feel a bit more like a grown up. You know, I had young kids, I was working for myself. I thought I need to get my money situation down. I had no savings behind me, no plan particularly. Did you have a light bulb moment like that? Or was it wholly accidental, like you've just mentioned? Did you ever have a moment where you thought, I need to get my money life sorted? Or did it just happen by accident?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's sorted now. I mean, I think that's again a fallacy for me personally. Like the process of sorting out my money life will never end. New things arise and new challenges come up and decisions with it's interesting because if you think about the approach to making a plan and a life plan, a business plan, a financial plan, they're all the same. If you're making a plan in a complex adaptive environment, all that means is that it's very hard to know the future. And there's this old saying that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I love to change that to all plans are wrong, comma, some are useful. And so if the normal approach is that you start with where you are, we call that point A, and then you guess at some future thing and you don't call it a guess, you like, really work really hard and you pretend that you know where you want to go. So you put it down as point B. So you say, like, how do I get from point A to point B? And then you draw a line between the two. Well, every part of that plan, every single part in the world, in reality, every part of that plan is wrong. Like A doesn't equal A. You're not even really sure where you are today. I mean, maybe your balance sheet is clear, but really your goals, like what you want to be when you grow up, do you want to change careers? You've been you've always wanted to open that fish and chip shop and you never have, and you've been jamming it down because you're just an accountant wearing khaki pants every day at the cubicle and it's stable. Why would you go start the fish and chips? Like, and that thing comes up and suddenly you're like, I don't even know if I have ground underneath my feet here, let alone that goal I set 3 months, 3 years, 30 years out, point B. And then of course the line, we know it's never going to look like that. And so I think if we can just ad- just finally like change our posture towards planning and realize that this is much more about being a little less wrong each day and
Hmm.
sort of give ourselves the grace and the permission. Like I would imagine, I know a lot of your listeners, you're like your age cohort, you've put so much pressure on yourselves to like be right and be stable and be independent and have security and certainty and if you don't have it, you're somehow morally failing yourself and your family and your community. And I mean that like all that pressure, that's fine because it drives us forward, but I think we also need to give ourselves more grace to be like, this is a never ending process. So no, I never had a light bulb moment.
Hmm.
I have one every day where I'm like, I mean, literally this morning we got an opportunity to go spend. We spent 4 years living in New Zealand. Last night, one of our friends said, "Hey, we'd love to do a house swap for 3 months for December, January, February, and March. So really like 3.5 months. Would you guys love it?" And it's always been our dream to spend. I love winters here. I love skiing, but I love summers in New Zealand on the ocean and they love winters here. So is this like, yeah, but is that responsible? And what's it going to do to the business? And how much is it going to cost? And part of me is like, who cares?
Hmm.
I got a chance to spend time. We'll have family visit us. It's a dream. Well, that's a new light bulb moment. So it never ends. And I think once we recognize that we actually don't want that gap between where we are and where we think we want to be, we actually don't want to close it. If you close it, life loses a bunch of its meaning.
I really, that's the first time someone said that. From where you are to where you want to be, we don't want to ever close that gap. It's
Yeah,
like, that's
it
really
that's called
profound.
I mean, in psychoanalysis, that's called the lack. And
Yes.
when humans really get in trouble is when they lack. So all this stuff around contentment and enough, it's incredibly important. So you've got to hold two things in your mind at the same time. I am enough, everything's great. And I think where this comes, like this is most clear would be in a relationship with a spouse or a child. Like I'm deeply proud and satisfied with my relationship with my 4 kids. Like I don't know that, like, I'm so happy. It's better than I ever thought it could be. They're all adults, 19 to 27. It's better than I ever dreamed. And I sure hope it's better tomorrow. And the day that I stop hoping it's better tomorrow, I don't even want to think about it. Like, when would you ever, like with a spouse, I'm really, really content and satisfied with my relationship with my wife. I really am. It's better than, honestly, it's a dream. My parents were divorced when I was 8. I can't believe I have this relationship with my spouse. And I sure hope I'm working really hard to make sure it's better tomorrow. So I think there's a way to hold both of those at the same time. We've all been trained that we want to close that gap.
Mm.
That there's some special object. Sometimes it's called object A. I like to just call it the next object. There's some special object that if we just discover it, there's some secret out there. If we just discover it, the lack will go away. We'll be content. We'll be happy. Well, actually, I think the better idea is just to embrace that gap and learn how to be content at the same time. Like, you can hold both of those in your mind at the same time. I wish somebody had
Yeah,
told me that earlier.
it's something that I often struggle with, as I'm sure many small business owners, people with ambition do, that balance of contentment with wanting more.
Yeah.
And I think that comes with money as well.
Rob, let me ask you a question. Why is that tell me about the struggle.
So I
How
think,
does it show up?
so in my personal experience, for example, for example, I'm chasing an opportunity, let's say a big project, something that's exciting, and then it happens, and the instant reaction is, great, what's next?
Yeah.
So there's kind of like, there's no
And do you feel
reflection.
like that's somehow that great what's next is you've been kind of maybe told or conditioned that at some point great what's next should diminish, and like, I have it, I'm satisfied. Why aren't you happy? Or are you painting that as a thing to be
Yeah, for
fixed,
me,
or
that's a
a benefit?
negative. It has risks of being negative because you're not realizing what you've got.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so the great what's
Yeah.
next isn't necessarily the bad thing. It's more
Yeah.
than not seeing what you've achieved, I guess.
Yeah. This to me is really important and kind of a new thing for me this has just developed over the last year or two, where I finally understood that the great what's next, like, that's what life's about.
Mm,
And I can be enough while pursuing it.
mm,
Like, I can hold both of those. It's really, really hard, but I can hold both of those. And because if the great what's next becomes all you care about at the expense of everything else, well, then that's maladaptive. That's not helpful. You end up a miserable SOB with no friends and no family and terrible health.
mm,
So of course it can get out of hand, and we see examples like that. I think money and success is the ultimate great what's next object. And it's the only object that has the kind of power where you can have somebody look you in the eyes and say you're going to die if you don't stop. And then you don't stop. Like, you go back to 80-hour work weeks. So I think we've all been told that the goal is non-attachment, contentment, and that someday if we just get to this place, we will no longer have the desire for what's next.
mm,
And I actually think I think that's a false promise. And the key is to manage both.
mm. Yeah, because we see, don't we, and we saw it. So, well, certainly over here, I'm sure you've noticed the same as well. That going back a few years now for COVID and the lockdown, when a lot of what you would stereotype as the busy working guy, the guy who works 60, 70, 80 hours a week, is never at home for breakfast or dinner or bedtime. He's just working. The first question you get asked at the trade counters or when you get to the office is, are you busy? As if that's the measure of success.
Yeah.
When they were locked in their homes for 6 months to a year, people were commenting how refreshing it was and how
Yep.
nice it was to see the family. But then as soon as the trap was lifted, they were off back to work, back to a life that they've always had to pursue busy.
Yeah.
And it's a real strange setup that we've built ourselves into. It is that hamster wheel, isn't it? Just to get busy. And I guess, Cole, how do you know when you have enough? When's enough enough in that case? Yeah, when you're
Yeah. I just think paying attention to there's good versions of busy and there's bad versions of busy. And we just have to keep, I think it's really honestly, it's the coolest spiritual practice you can engage in is to just try to start learning and paying attention to the good version of busy and the bad version of busy. And because the other thing that happened during the pandemic is we had massive spikes in anxiety, suicide, and a lot of that was because the drive had been taken away, the lack, the desire to do something, even the ability to do something. That's part of our makeup. So there's good, and I think it's just purely figuring out the good versions and the bad versions. Because yeah, it's crazy that I think the pandemic, I mean, we were in London for that year of 2020. And I think it allowed us to start asking questions that we've never asked before, like what is enough? Who do I trust? Where do I want to live? What do I
Mm,
want to do? How do I make meaning in the world? But making meaning, you know, separate out money and ambition or success, but like just making meaning, there's this same feeling of like, oh, I didn't quite get there. What, oh, I just held a, because you could help, I just held an amazing dinner for a nonprofit and we raised more money than we ever dreamed. And you're walking to your car thinking, gosh, how could we do it a little better? And that's about meaning. And like we just fed 100 people who would have died. And you leave thinking, that was amazing. And I wonder if we could do 110 next time. Well, just figuring out. And by the way, your kids are wondering where you've been the last 2 weeks.
mm.
So there is no magic answer, is what I'm saying. It's just this continual recalibration, balancing. But one of the answers isn't one day, if I get a certain object, if I just find the secret, eh, I'll be whole and complete and I'll no longer have to think about. I don't think like, man, that's why retirement's such I think actually quite an outdated, silly
Mm.
concept for most people, because most people find themselves terribly unhappy. Now, there's some manual labor type stuff that retirement's like, oh, just physically it's important. But you find those people saying, hey, now what's my purpose? So maybe I'm no longer laying bricks, but can I be involved at the local community center?
Mm.
But the idea of like, I'm going to go from hard work to nothing doesn't work very well for humans.
No, no. I mean, the thought of retirement, probably for my generation down, and it sounds like yourself as well, but probably not everyone in your age bracket. I do think there is more of a lifestyle by design element, if you like. The Tim Ferriss 4 Hour Work Week, lifestyle by design. We can create the life we want. Um, I think it's sometimes pitched a bit of a silver bullet, like it's easy to do, and it's something if you don't do, then you're a failure. I love my work. I like working because it's my own business. So therefore, it's a great thing to do. Um, and I guess from what you're referencing there, Carl, there is a base that every family household needs financially before they can start to pursue, for example, the charity dinners. If you're out doing a charity dinner but you're not feeding your kids at home, then your priorities probably need a bit of a shift. And I guess this is where we perhaps come into the behavior gap, the work, around the money, the financial stability. Um, can you just define what you mean by the behavior gap? Because we might reference it a few times throughout the chat. It'd be good to know the concept around it.
Yeah, I mean, the original concept was this really interesting thing that I noticed early in my career where well-intentioned, and it was specifically about investing. Now it's definitely broadened since then, but well-intentioned people, and I think most people, because of the what I call the financial pornography network, the news, buy, sell, yelling, screaming. Most people think the job of a good investor is to find the best investment. And what inevitably and a lot of our logic that applies in other areas, Like if you were going to hire a new rugby coach for the rugby club, it would make sense to look. In fact, it'd be a bad idea to not look. You would definitely look at the past work of the rugby coaches you were interviewing. And it would be reasonable to expect that to continue into the future. If you're at business school, like business school 101, you're taught if you have 3 divisions and one of them is doing, if you have 2 divisions and one of them is doing poorly and one's doing really well, you kill the one that was doing poorly and you reallocate the resources to the one that's doing well. But in the investment world, that's called buying high and selling low, right? Like, and so if we look at the past, so that's kind of what we think is our job's to find the best investment. What's the first thing we do? We look at what's done really well over the last, I mean, it used to be we would say like over the last 3 to 5 years. Now I think it's like we say over the last 3 to 5 months,
Yeah.
or maybe even the last 3 to 5 hours, and so, but the problem is that's something that's done really well. And we know in the investment world, when something does really well, it's going to have a normal cyclical time when it doesn't do well. We don't know when that's going to change. And the people on the financial pornography network pretend they know, and they make up lots of really fancy stories about it. But if you actually look at their records, they don't know. Like I can't remember who said, I mean, we can always attribute any catchy little phrase about investing to Warren Buffett. But it was something like I would compare stock market forecasters to astrologists, but I don't want to give astrologists a bad name. So they're historically really, really bad at it, but it sounds really, really like it sounds legit because they have all these fancy titles and fancy stories and steak dinners and people from London and people from New York. But the problem is, as an investor, just a normal human, we're walking around thinking, oh, that must be the job. And what repeatedly happens is people buy high. And the reason you do that is because you're like, oh, all my neighbors are buying that.
Mm-hmm.
The news is saying it's a good idea. If everybody thinks something's a good idea, that's always after it's gone up. And so we got all this herd behavior. There's a whole bunch of wiring built into it. So the whole system, if you were, and this is again a Buffett thing, I think, or Charlie Munger, if you were to design a poor investor, you would design a human because our very wiring makes us bad at it. We like from the very genetic traits that have kept us alive as a species to deeply desire more of anything that gives us security or pleasure and want to run away as fast as we can from anything that causes us pain. That's kept us alive as a species. It's very good. Well, it's exactly the wrong thing when it comes to investing because security and pleasure are things that have already gone up. So we buy there, and then at some point in the future, you could be rewarded for like 3 or 4 months. You're like, well, look, this thing I bought, aren't I smart?
I'm an expert. Yeah.
Yeah, it keeps going up. I'm going to start a hedge fund. And then it inevitably goes down. And then you say, oh, that was really dumb. And you sell that. So you bought high, you sell relatively low. And then what's the first thing you do? You do it again. You look at like, now I'll listen to this other expert. Well, that behavior was creating this gap between investment returns, the returns that investments were generating, and investor returns, which is kind of a complicated thing to describe. But it turns out that most people buy, and I think most of your listeners can probably relate to this. If you're just honest, the interesting thing about investing is it leaves a breadcrumb trail of evidence, like your taxes. You can just go look. What's been your experience over the last 7 or 8 years? Have you continually bought things that you thought for sure were a great idea? I know I have. And then they go down and you're like, that was a terrible idea, and you sell it. And then it goes up and you regret that you sold it. So that's what now I think the behavior gap more generally applies. And remember, like I have deep empathy for this mistake that we all make because I make it all the time. And it makes sense that we do it. It's the way we would hire a rugby coach. It's the way if you want to remodel your kitchen, you would look at the person who you'd look at their past work. But it doesn't work in investment. It leads to buying high and selling low. So it's a well-intentioned behavior. So this is what the behavior gap means to me now. Any well-intentioned behavior that leads to a suboptimal result. And I could spend hours talking about it, but that's kind of the summary.
And I guess should people, I don't just want to dabble wholly in the investing side, but it is a topic that really interests me. And I think we assume because we see people say, the Bitcoin thing is a classic, I assume, where people are buying high and selling low. Everyone's doing it. I'm going to pile in. They think they're an expert overnight. It drops and they all disappear. They go away. Do you think everyone can or should be their own investor? Or is this a case of get rich slow without offering financial advice? Get rich slow, just stick it in the funds because none of these hedge fund managers can beat the market, and just let the funds
100%.
thing.
100%. And it's really, really hard because it always like this time is different. It's the new thing. Everybody's doing it. You don't understand. The whole system's changing. I've been through 27 years of this. I could give you example after example after example. You're much better off, much better off focusing on increasing your ability to earn money, your ability to save money, and then save it in a way that you won't lose. Like what was I can't I keep misattributing quotes, but I can't remember who it was. It was
Just like
Will
Buffett.
Will Rogers, I think was he said, "Don't tell me about the return on my money. Tell me about the return of my money." And so yeah, you just buy. The one thing we do know is diversification works and costs matter. And so that's like one thing we do know, like the evidence is clear about this. There is a way to invest based on evidence instead of stories and myths. And the evidence is buy a broadly diversified mutual fund that is low cost and then just never sell it. That's the evidence. Pretty simple, really hard to do because of all the noise around you. But if you can tune out the noise and just do that, you'll outperform 99% of your neighbors.
That's people think it should be an exciting rock and roll lifestyle, but in reality, it's really not, is it?
It's not. I mean, like, look, the key to Warren Buffett's success was not that he was a great investor. This is a Morgan Housel quote from Psychology of Money. The key to Warren Buffett's success was not skill; it was time. I mean, he made most of his money after he was 65.
Yeah, it's the compound thing, right?
Like 85 or 90% of his wealth came after the age of 65. It's crazy. So it's just doing boring things for a long time.
See, it's not very sexy at all, is it?
No, get the sexy somewhere else.
Yeah,
Go to the movies, go to the rugby match, like do something else.
Build you reference it in the book. You don't need a financial plan. You talk about life planning rather than financial planning. And this, in the introduction, I guess, is where I mentioned about money equaling happiness. And I talk to one of my friends about this often. He's very much about the lifestyle thing. I'm probably a bit more rigid with my savings and my structure, trying to get a bit more relaxed around that. Somewhere in the middle, there's happy. And I like how your perspective of it is life planning. I guess the argument is that your life should set the bar on what money you need, not money just to fuel whatever it is you want to do.
What the hell? I mean, what are we doing with it? And I'm pointing to myself all day long. Right? Like how do we get so confused so quick? Of course, money is the servant, not the master.
Yeah, and I think that's important to underline, isn't it? We get so bogged down in the pursuit of more, but for what? For what end? For what sake?
Yeah, and I know I just had a conversation with Pete Rollins, the Irish philosopher, yesterday for my podcast 50 Fires, and we just point to example. Money is one of the very few things that really has this incredible pull that it can quickly, if you aren't careful, if you don't intentionally guard against it, money can become the end in and of itself. And it was never meant to be that. It's been meant to be it's just a tool. That's it. It's a tool. It's meant to be used. Like the Aesop fable of the miser, right? Gets all worried about protecting his possessions, so he sells everything and trades it into gold. takes the gold and buries it, and goes every day in the night to dig it up and count it, reburies it. And somebody sees him doing it. And so when he's not looking, they sneak over there and steal it all. And the miser comes back that next day, digs it up, finds there nothing there, and just moans and wails. And Aesop says he tears his hair out. And a passerby is like, "Hey, bro, what's going on?" He's like, "Well, somebody stole all my gold." It's like, "Well, what was it doing in the?" He's like, "Well, I certainly wasn't going to spend it, so I had it buried here to keep it safe." And the guy takes out a handful of rocks and throws it in the hole and says, "Here, bury those and come back and count those every day. It'll do the same thing." So yeah, it's not meant to be the rocks buried in the, it's not meant to be the end. It's not meant, it's just a tool to be used. All the wisdom traditions, all the philosophers, all the sages, all the poets, all the prophets, all say the same thing. Like it's, don't get distracted by it. Don't make it a means. So of course your life should drive your financial decisions. Of course.
Uh,
And wow, easy to say, hard to do.
well, it is easy to say, isn't it? Because you do need to. You can't be negligent, especially when you've got family. You've got 4 kids. I'm soon to have 4 kids. You need. I think what challenged me, or what lit a fire under me, was when I was made redundant when I first started working for myself. My wife had our first kid. Who was 2, and she was pregnant with our second. And I didn't grow up with money. The family didn't have money. And I just thought, I need to make sure that if I'm not around, my kids are okay. And that's kind of driven me for 10 years since. And I think sometimes that does make my priority chasing cash, but it is for a purpose. And it is, yeah, my wife works part-time. So, the money has to come from somewhere to cover an increasing overhead with cost of living, with inflation. So there is I guess, a responsibility for us to say, right, what's the basis that we need? How do we cover our foundation? And then build a plan from that? Is that?
Sure, but that is all your life driving your decisions. And you can lever that life a bit, right? Like you can decide to move to a cheaper place. You could take your kids out of private school. You could, and there's only so many levers you can pull, and you get to decide, like, well, so they're just constant trade-offs, right? Like
Mm,
maybe, because you get the little finger wavy people that tell you to stop buying coffee every day. And okay, that's a lever you could pull. Is that trade-off worth it to you? I'm going to suggest it's probably not.
mm,
Like when I talk to people about one of the things they enjoy most about their day, it's often like the time they meet with their friend at the coffee shop and have a little chat, or just even the barista there, knowing their name and that deep sense of connection. And what did it cost you? $4? For that? Well, maybe that trade-off's not worth it. Well, okay, we could go all the way up to, do you need the new car? Is that trade-off worth it? For some people it is. For some people it's
mm,
not. So unfortunately, there is no magic object that's going to give you all the answers. But I think you're pointing in the right direction, which is, okay, my wife works part-time. We've got increasing overhead. Are there anything about those overhead that we find? Like, I would just be constantly, and this is one thing I do a lot of, which is just constantly experimenting and thinking about it. Is that really worth it? I mean, we spend an insane amount of money on making sure our yard and the fire pit is a place to gather. Well, it's because we hold retreats here. We have people coming here all the time to feel safe and comfortable. Well, for some people, they don't care about what the yard looks like or that they have a fire pit. And so, like, I'm just pointing to, okay, let's run experiments. And
mm.
in one experiment we found out recently, we don't really enjoy going out to dinner. We thought we did. Don't all the cool kids? Isn't that what you're supposed to do when you get to be a certain spot? We don't really enjoy it. We'd much rather make dinner here with some friends. Well, it turns out that costs less. That's
Mm.
cool. But so I just think you just continually run experiments around what's actually important to you. You're really just trying, Rob, to align your use of capital. And I think of that as time, money, energy, and attention. I know you love Venn diagrams. So assume that that's one circle. And beware of the Venn diagram police, by the way. Like the Venn diagram police write me like 4-page emails that convince me why my stuff are not Venn diagrams. So I started calling them circle sketches. I used to argue with them, send back 4-page rebuttals. And finally I was like, you're right. It's called a circle sketch. So imagine a circle sketch with one circle that says use of capital, and the capital has an asterisk, and the asterisk says time, money, energy, and attention, your four sources of capital. And the other circle says what's important to you. And you're just trying to get, sometimes there's a gap. There's literally a gap. Like there's no overlap. Oh, that's time for a course correction. Sometimes there's a little overlap. Sometimes it looks like one circle. It's a perfect overlap. But that's going to change, ebb and flow for the rest of your life. And that's again just another spiritual practice. So we're just trying to align our use of capital with what's important. Sometimes what's important changes. Sometimes our use of capital changes. In fact, it's going to change every day. So get used to it.
Well, your priorities change as well as you move through stages of life, right? So I guess
Totally.
what I'm hearing there, Carl, is it's about being more responsible and more aware rather than just going after the pursuit of cash, as we've mentioned before. It's not an end unto itself, but it's more of a continuum and a flow, and about how
Yeah,
one can fuel the other.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know about the use of the word responsible. It totally fine, but I think aware is really interesting. Intentional. You used the word design earlier.
Mm.
Just really intentional, thoughtful, and you're gonna get it wrong and notice like, oh, huh, that's interesting. We went to dinner and a movie with that couple. Why did we go there? Because we wanted to connect. Well, how well did the connection work in the noisy restaurant and a theater where you don't talk to each other? Oh, not very well. Oh, maybe we should have them over for dinner. Oh, that was fun. So we're just paying attention. We're being intentional about the trade-offs. I don't know that we get that much out of that family vacation that we take every year. Turns out the kids told me that they like just going to the lake for 3 days. It's 2 hours from the house. Are we sure we need to go to Paris?
Mm.
I don't know. You know what? I'd rather not go to the lake every year for 5 years and go to Paris once because our family really values it. Okay. Like just pay attention. And there's
Yeah,
no right answer
and
except
having
yours.
discussions and having that I guess the discussion with my wife, your spouse, the chapter who's important to the decisions rather than being so headstrong, just saying I'm doing this because that makes it a
For
bit
sure.
more selfish, right? Um, what are some of the silly things you see people doing with money, Carl? When they've got it, what are they doing? Are they wasting it? Are they just frittering it? How can we avoid this?
Yeah. I think the biggest is to just not do what we just talked about. Like and we all do this. Like not paying attention to basically using money for other people's goals. Like Instagram, funding an Instagram life that is not yours. And forget Instagram. It could just be your parents' goals. It could be your community's goals. It's so not paying attention, not asking, not examining, not living an examined financial life. Yeah, of course, buy high, sell low, wasting money. But I think the biggest one, is not taking the time to understand why you're doing it in the first place. Like, what are your goals? And Stephen Covey's great quote, or paraphrasing here, was, um, the last thing you want to do is spend your whole life climbing a ladder only to find out it's leaning against the wrong wall. And I can't tell you the number of conversations I'm having with 50-year-olds that are like, they'll show me some evidence of having made it, a balance sheet. I sold a business for $50 million, or an income statement. I make $1 million a year. And then they look around to make sure nobody's listening. And they say, is this all it was for? I won the game and I feel like I'm lost. And so I think the biggest mistake we can make is this not thinking carefully about what wall the ladder is leaning against.
So
That's the biggest.
would you suggest going back to your AB analogy and the lack? Would you suggest B is the wall, perhaps? A might be the ladder. And look, this guy who sold a business for 50 million or makes $1 million a year is kind of a great ladder, but has he filled the gap and therefore he's just lost his purpose or something?
Yeah, I think that's right. Like A is, just trying to get a sense of where you are today. I call it current reality, and it turns out that's really hard. It's always changing and morphing. And when you include, like, your balance sheet might be set, but when you include a snapshot in time called a balance sheet might be set. But when you include your feelings and your relationships, and then B would be, yeah, this is where I think I was headed. And I think just carefully paying attention to when B doesn't equal B anymore. Like B has become C, B has become D. And being like not, there's some sense that we want to defend an outdated map because we work so hard on it. Like that's who I thought I was. This is what the financial plan says. This is what, since I was 12, I wanted to have $1 million in the bank and own a sailboat. Like we have some ego attachment to those
Mm.
things. And I think we just need to give ourselves permission to go, oh my gosh, isn't that fascinating that I thought I wanted to go to B? And I'm really glad I did because I headed in this direction, general direction. It gave me a goal. It feels good. It's given me drive. But you know what? I'm not sure I like sailboats. Maybe C. And it's that gracious and that open in the sense of like, maybe, like, let's try a little something different. It's playful. It's generous. It's not like, I gotta know, because you
Mm.
can't.
And how often, I really like the idea of fluid goals, but I think that's great. I mean, how often do you think you should check in with yourself to make sure you're still on course?
Yeah, it's an
Am I
interesting
going the right
question.
way?
It's an interesting question. I think there's some sense of like ritual around, you always hear people about, journaling daily or, you go to church on Sundays because it reminds you, like there's some sense of this reminding you of time to think. And then also there's also a case of like, look, I just want to have the goal out there. I'm going to take that goal hat off for a little bit and just kind of be here for a little while. And so I don't know the right answer. I used to think that we'd review those things once a year, those big goals once a year, but we'd be paying attention to clues every day and journaling and thinking about and having conversations. But I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. It's a really good question.
Yeah, it's one to take away and think about, really. I mean,
Yeah.
I try and sit down sort of, I guess, as phases happen, as we move house, are we happy where we are? Finances at the end of the year, did we achieve what we need to? Has it allowed us to go on a month away that we like to go on? What's next? How can we push a little bit more? Back to the ambition piece, I guess. And I just wanted to touch on one more topic, Carl, before we ask you for some little tips around behaviors moving forwards. Obviously, having kids, they're absorbed and consumed by YouTube, by influencers, by people who just have no regard, it seems, for material things. They'll give away PlayStations, they'll give away thousands of dollars, they'll go into shops and buy all the stock. And then my kids say, I want something. I want it. I want it. I want just for material's sake. And as the grumpy old parent, sometimes I'm there to say, well, no, because you don't know the value of things. When do you think we should start to instill value or life perception or this lifestyle and awareness in our kids?
Yeah,
Because
as soon
it's
as
something I think is
possible.
getting incredibly hard to do.
Yeah, I think learn helping them make as soon as possible. We're saying things like, "Oh, tell me more about that. Like, what is it that you think that would do?" Or tell me why. Oh, that's interesting. You want that? Tell me why. I love the question of like, well, when did you first learn about that? And where? And so you're just trying to help them. You're not, you don't have to look with your 4-year-old, you don't have to introduce them to psychoanalysis. I'm just saying,
Coaching questions
but
like,
yeah, but just asking them questions about, oh, that's like a 4-year-old. Like I've had some of the best conversations about money ever with 4 and 6 and 8-year-olds, just by just saying, oh, what? Like I remember when my 8-year-old said, the neighbors must be rich. They just got a new water ski boat. And I said what I was taught to say, which is that's none of your business. And then I saw the look on his face and I luckily course corrected and said, oh, tell me more about that. Like just tell me more. Why do you think that? What is it about? And we had this great conversation about, the boat being some idea that they must be rich and that rich means happy. And like so I just think the more we can have those conversations, the better as early as possible.
just normalize it a little bit more.
Yeah. Just helping them understand trade-offs, being thoughtful, being a little more examined instead of just see something by it.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, Carl, this topic of mindset and money and behaviors, it fascinates me. I think we could talk for hours, but I'm very respectful of your time as well. Just if we can, I don't believe in silver bullets or quick wins particularly, but as it's a podcast, we need some quick wins. If there are some behavior changes to check in with for those listening and watching, what would be something to go away and do on the back of
Yeah.
listening to this?
Here's a hack for you. One weird trick. Just for the next 30 days, every time you spend money, just ask yourself, I call it 3 seconds for 30 days. Ask yourself every time you spend money. Don't ask yourself anything. Just notice. Like it's literally no shame, no gain, no blame, no intent to change, no goal. The only goal is to just say, as you spend money, oh, I just spent $12.72 at the pub. Isn't that interesting? Do that for 30 days. What will you get? Let's say 5 reps a day. You're gonna 150 times. Just 3 seconds. Just pause. Like maybe, you leave the store and you got a receipt. Before you throw the receipt in the trash outside the store, look at it and say, I just spent, $37 at the grocery. Isn't that interesting? No goal to change. I promise you in 30 days, things will change. And that's not the goal. Just this is the secret hack. Simple awareness for 30 days. Try that and report back to me.
Love it. I'm going to try that. It's June 1st on Saturday. I'm going to try that for June.
Perfect. For the month of June, just every time you spend money, including like you pay your utility bill, no shame, no blame. There's no desire to change anything. Just, oh, I just paid $147 for the power bill. Isn't that interesting? You're just going to use, isn't that interesting? That's it for 30 days.
I'll report back.
Yeah.
I like that.
Okay, Rob.
That's brilliant. Where can we find more about your work? I mean, this is brilliant, by the way, the Behaviour Gap.
Thank you.
Where can we see more about your work, your blogs? Please do share.
Yeah, the easiest thing to do is just go to behaviorgap.com and sign up for the weekly letter. We've been sending a weekly email for, I don't know, it's more than a decade now. And we work really hard to send you less. So it's the shortest, most impactful weekly email you'll get on the internet. It's a sketch and as few words as possible. And I think you'll love it. It's behaviorgap.com. Spelled incorrectly.
Yeah.
No you.
Spelled the American way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Carl,
Cheers, Rob.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Take care.